Thank you for joining me this morning. I have some prepared remarks and then I'll be happy to take your questions. My name is Dennis Murray. The Inspector General helps us to make the Inspector General helps to make Ohioans trust their government. The bill I'm introducing today will make sure Ohioans can trust their Inspector General. As you know, this legislation was conceived following news reports about the Inspector General's report on the Departments of Administrative Services, Public Safety, and Rehabilitation and Corrections oversight concerning the prisoner rehabilitation program for the governor's residents in the January conveyance case. In fact, Glenn Dealer highlighted this issue quite succinctly. Glenn Dealer reported that there's no getting around an obvious conflict for Inspector General Charles in this case. Charles is a retired Highway Patrol officer, and Charles' wife is a current Highway Patrol officer who interviewed last year to be appointed head of patrol, a job Thomas Taylor in December gave instead to Digger. Ohio law provides no clear alternatives in an IG investigation. The law needs to be updated, so an Ohio Inspector General isn't expected to investigate his or her old employer or the employer of a close relative. The legislation I am proposing speaks directly to this issue, and frankly, it's quite simple, if not obvious. It requires the IG to recuse him or herself under certain circumstances, and it outlines the process to make recusal clear. More specifically, this bill requires the Inspector General to disqualify himself or herself from participation in any decisions or investigations pertaining to an agency of which he or she was formerly an employee or is a family member of a current employee. In the event of a recusal, the Inspector General is empowered and required to designate an existing Deputy Inspector General free of any such conflict to act in his or her stead regarding that matter. By doing this, the bill recognizes that these circumstances are likely to lead to the appearance of conflicting interests and provides a legal means for the Inspector General to avoid casting doubt on an investigation. A course of action which the Inspector General, in this case, may recently have chosen if it were available to him. Though this legislation fills an existing gap in the law regarding this office, it is similar to the process of recusal already established by rule for the Ohio Tax Commissioner and reflects the rigorous ethics standards that are critical to an impartial system of justice. Conflicts of interest are not uncommon in the judicial system, and in almost every other case, there's a clear process for recusal. This bill uses similar procedures for recusal and applies them to the Inspector General's office. This common sense law change will promote transparency and protect the office of Attorney General or the Inspector General. Certainly, we must address such issues while maintaining transparency. The work of this office is simply too important to be tainted by a potential conflict of interest. My bill will help us maintain the integrity of the Ohio Inspector General and ensure that Ohioans can continue to trust their top statewide office holders. As a lawmaker and an Ohioan, I have a vested interest in making sure Ohio's public office holders remain dedicated to the principle of honesty and integrity. I'd be happy to take any questions which you may have.
I have a question. The timing seems curious. Why now? There have been several Inspector General investigations with this Inspector General, with the State Patrol, and on the eve of these hearings, you proposed this legislation.
Well, the Glenn Dealer's editorial last week really underscored the point. And while we're all talking about this, and frankly, one of the things that is troubling to me is that as we are cycling through the questions surrounding the Inspector General's report, every single conversation and every single article also says, well, there's this question about whether this particular Inspector General ought to be involved in a potential conflict of interest. So while we're all focused on it, I think this is the right time to act.
Dennis, I think you mentioned that if there is a recusal that takes place, that another employee of the Inspector General's office would do the investigation. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Is that far enough removed, considering that the IG would still be that person's boss?
I think it is. That's something that is a process that's very similar to what courts use. In fact, it's very similar to what large law firms use. They do build a wall so there is information going back and forth. And in that instance, the bill would provide that the Deputy Inspector General would be would be in charge of the complete process, both the investigation and the reading and the signing of the report.
Do you think the outcome of this investigation would have been different had the Inspector General's wife not been, had that not been initiated?
Well, that's the whole point, isn't it? We don't know the answer to that question. I don't have an opinion as to whether that's so, but that's the reason that we want to provide for a recusal mechanism in those instances where there are legitimate questions that are raised.
So do you think that there's been this conflict that's tainted these previous investigations as well?
I'm not referring to any previous investigations. The one that precipitated this legislation is the one that we're all talking about today. And have been talking about for several weeks.
But the facts at hand really haven't changed in terms of the conflict of interest. And before now, the ideas acted with basically the blessing of the governor. Practically, the governor appointed him, has never had any problem with his investigation, at least publicly, of the OSP until this point. And certainly, as you know, this is the one that is the most embarrassing to the governor.
Well, that is something that I don't know what the governor's considerations have been in that regard. I have not discussed this legislation with anyone in the administration. This is something that I, as a lawmaker, think needs to be done. And having read about it for a couple of weeks to months at this point in time, I think it's time to take action.
Your sons, daughters, spouses, meeting them?
I think it should be one level of co-sanguinity. Excuse me, when we look at the draft that I have here, it's essentially one level of co-sanguinity. So it's a spouse, sibling, natural or adopted parent, or natural or adopted child.
And again, you think that the Inspector General's office is currently made up could easily designate somebody else leading office to do that, even though 1/3 of their staff had worked the patrol at one time or another?
Absolutely. I think that leaves 2/3 who would be quite capable of being able to handle those responsibilities.
It's kind of a corollary issue. Are you concerned at this point that there is sort of a crisis between the offices of the Inspector General and the governor, that perhaps to a certain extent, whatever the legitimate reasons there may be for contesting the IG's report, the bottom line is that's created a very difficult situation for the Inspector General to do his job, and that is to investigate matters of the state?
Well, I think that's largely exactly the question. It's not something that I have considered in proposing this legislation, but I think that cloud that's cast over the Inspector General's impartiality doesn't help the situation. And so I think we want to make certain that these kinds of questions aren't brought up in the future. And, you know, in fairness to the Inspector General in this case, he said, I don't want to get the quote exactly right, so let me find it in here. He indicated a great deal of, I thought, concern about essentially being required to act in this circumstance. He indicated, and I think this was contained in the report from the dealer, I stayed as far away from it as I could, just for those reasons, again, referring to the question about conflict of interest. So that's what I'm referring to when I say that the Inspector General is essentially required by current law to read and sign the report. I think that the Inspector General was put in a position that we should not put Inspector Generals in the future, and we should provide this kind of podcast.
To misdirect the public attention from the truth that is going to be put forth in the hearings in the next 2 days. What's your response to that?